He lied to save her. Now she has to decide if loving him is worth surviving the truth. Beneath the rotting floorboards of a forgotten forest cabin, something ancient and engineered is stirring. What began as a romantic escape has become a descent into a nightmare of steel corridors, failed experiments, and memories that were never theirs to begin with. Trapped in a buried world where science replaced ethics and love was never meant to exist, they must face the impossible. One of them was never real. But something deeper than DNA binds them now, something powerful enough to defy the very system that created it, if they can survive each other first. Well, friends, subscribe to our channel, and please let us know in the comments where you're watching us from and how we can improve. Thank you for your engagement, and enjoy watching. The narrow forest road curved gently upward, flanked on both sides by towering pines whose branches intertwined to form an emerald canopy overhead. Eli's fingers tightened lightly around the steering wheel, his eyes fixed ahead, anticipating the cabin that promised a weekend of tranquility. Beside him, Laura adjusted her sunglasses, leaning slightly out of the open window to feel the crisp mountain air brushing softly against her skin. She turned back toward him, smiling, her auburn hair catching golden streaks from the late afternoon sun. "Almost there," Eli said softly, sensing her impatience mingled with excitement. Laura responded with a playful glance, stretching leisurely as if shaking off the burdens of city life with each mile. The cabin emerged suddenly from the dense foliage, a cozy structure of weathered timber and dark stone nestled comfortably within a secluded clearing. The windows caught the fading daylight, glowing warmly against the twilight shadows now creeping steadily around it. "Better than the pictures," Laura whispered, stepping out of the car and gazing at their retreat. The air was tinged with pine and the faintest hint of damp earth. A quiet serenity enveloped the clearing, broken only by distant birdsong and the occasional rustle of wildlife hidden from sight. Inside, the cabin greeted them warmly, a rustic interior of exposed beams, thick woven rugs, and a stone fireplace already stacked neatly with dry logs. Eli moved to ignite the fire, his movements confident and practiced, as Laura wandered slowly, absorbing the comforting atmosphere. They spent the evening wrapped in thick blankets near the fire, glasses of rich red wine resting lightly between fingers. Their conversation flowed gently, interspersed with comfortable silences. The restlessness of the city seemed worlds away, replaced by a peaceful intimacy that deepened as night fell. But as the hours passed, Laura found herself strangely alert, her senses heightened rather than relaxed. At one point, she sat up sharply, cocking her head toward the window. Eli raised an eyebrow, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Did you hear that?" Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Outside, the darkness was thick, impenetrable. "Probably just animals," Eli reassured, pulling her gently back into his embrace. Yet Laura's unease lingered, faint but persistent, gnawing at the edges of her comfort. Late into the night, long after Eli's breathing had settled into the rhythmic pattern of deep sleep, Laura lay awake, staring upward into the darkened ceiling beams. Just as she began drifting, a subtle, almost imperceptible vibration resonated through the floor beneath her, accompanied by a muffled thud. She sat bolt upright, heart racing. Holding her breath, she strained her ears, but the night was silent once more, mocking her sudden fear. Glancing toward Eli, peacefully oblivious beside her, Laura felt a shadow of uncertainty creep into her thoughts. The perfect getaway, she realized with a shiver, might hold secrets far darker than the comforting facade suggested. Morning sunlight seeped through the thick curtains, gently nudging Laura from restless sleep. She rubbed her eyes, briefly disoriented, and glanced around the rustic room. Eli had already risen, his side of the bed neatly arranged, the scent of fresh coffee drifting in from the kitchen. Pulling on a soft wool sweater, Laura stepped onto the creaky wooden floor, her bare feet chilled by the lingering night air. "Morning," Eli greeted softly, handing her a steaming mug, his gaze tender but distant. "I'll head to town soon. Anything special you want?" Laura shook her head gently, sipping coffee and watching him curiously. There was an unfamiliar tension in his movements, subtle yet unmistakable. Eli smiled faintly, kissed her forehead, and left through the cabin door, his departure leaving a peculiar emptiness in the silence that followed. Left alone, Laura wandered around, sipping coffee, eyes scanning the shelves lined with worn books and trinkets, each whispering forgotten stories. But her attention drifted outside, where the forest beckoned mysteriously. Stepping onto the porch, she inhaled deeply, breathing in the sharp freshness of the mountain air. As she walked along the tree line, an odd glint beneath a thick patch of ferns caught her eye. Curiosity pricked her senses, and she knelt down, brushing aside the vegetation. Beneath lay a rusted iron handle attached to a wooden trapdoor, partially concealed by moss and years of neglect. Her heart quickened, a pulse of nervous excitement vibrating through her veins. Glancing around instinctively, Laura grasped the handle and pulled hard. The door creaked reluctantly open, releasing a rush of stale, damp air. Peering cautiously into the shadowed passage below, her senses prickled with unease and intrigue. Taking her phone for light, she descended carefully down a steep set of concrete stairs, each step echoing softly against damp walls. The air felt thick, oppressive, carrying an unnatural chill. Her phone's flashlight illuminated narrow tunnels stretching ominously ahead, flanked by cracked walls etched with fading graffiti and disturbing stains. Laura moved cautiously forward, guided more by fascination than fear. The deeper she went, the heavier the silence grew, as though the air itself withheld its breath. Abruptly, a soft whisper echoed from the darkness, causing her heart to leap sharply. "Hello," Laura called out, her voice brittle and uncertain. Silence replied. She paused, her breathing quickening. Then, faintly, almost imperceptibly, came a low scraping sound, distant yet unmistakably purposeful. Dread tightened her chest, overcoming curiosity, and she hastily retreated, racing back toward the stairs, her footsteps reverberating through the tunnels behind her. Emerging breathlessly into daylight, Laura slammed the trapdoor shut, covering it hastily with ferns. Her fingers trembled as she smoothed the earth, attempting to erase all traces of her intrusion. The sunlight now seemed unreal, superficial, failing to dispel the lingering darkness she'd carried up from below. Returning to the cabin, Laura sank onto the porch steps, heart hammering, mind spinning with fragmented fears. Something was terribly wrong here, hidden just beneath their idyllic sanctuary, whispering secrets that she now felt strangely compelled and frightened to uncover. Laura waited until the last glow of sunset faded behind the forest canopy before making her move. She'd spent hours pacing restlessly around the cabin, torn between confronting Eli and discovering more first. As shadows enveloped the house, she heard Eli's steady breathing, a sure sign he was deep in sleep. Quietly slipping from bed, she dressed quickly and crept outside, drawn inexorably back to the trapdoor beneath the ferns. The night air was sharp and cold, each breath leaving misty echoes around her. Laura hesitated only briefly, then lifted the heavy door and descended into the darkness, the tunnel swallowing her instantly. She moved forward cautiously, phone trembling in her grasp, its weak beam barely piercing the oppressive gloom. Eventually, the tunnel opened into a wider corridor lined with rusted metal doors, their hinges corroded from years of neglect. Her breath quickened as she noticed a half-open door to her left, revealing a faint glimmer of dim fluorescent lighting. Inside lay an abandoned office, papers scattered haphazardly across dusty desks and overturned cabinets. Heart-pounding, Laura sifted through yellowed files filled with faded medical charts and photographs. She froze abruptly, fingers tightening around a black and white photograph. The face staring back at her sent ice down her spine. Unmistakably Eli, younger but eerily unchanged, with a note scribbled hastily in the corner. Subject 47, Project Rebirth. A heavy dread settled over her, a cold truth crystallizing painfully in her mind. Eli wasn't just linked to this place. He was its secret. You weren't supposed to find this. Eli's voice cut through the silence, startling her so violently she nearly dropped the photograph. He stood in the doorway, his figure illuminated starkly by the dim corridor lighting, features drawn and haunted. Eli, what is this? Laura's voice trembled with hurt and confusion. Tell me it's not true. Eli stepped closer, anguish deepening the lines of his face. I wanted to protect you. I tried to keep you away from all of this. Protect me, she whispered bitterly. You lied to me. I had no choice. Eli's voice echoed harshly against the bare walls, his expression a torment of guilt and despair. They created me here, Laura, manufactured my entire life. Everything was controlled. Everything except meeting you. Silence stretched painfully between them. Laura's heart twisted with a mix of betrayal and unexpected compassion as Eli's truth settled heavily in her chest. Footsteps echoed suddenly from the tunnels beyond, voices raised sharply in alarm. They're coming, Eli said urgently, reaching for her hand. They know we're here. Laura hesitated only briefly, staring deeply into his eyes, seeing sincerity and fear mingled with love. She grabbed his hand, her fingers entwining tightly with his, choosing trust despite everything. Then we run, she whispered fiercely, and together they plunged into the labyrinth, the darkness behind them filled with approaching danger and the painful truth she could no longer ignore. They sprinted through the dimly lit tunnels, breaths ragged, hearts thundering like war drums. Every shadow felt like a threat, every sound amplified by fear. Eli led the way, his grip firm yet gentle on Laura's hand, guiding her deftly through winding passages he seemed to recall instinctively. She tried to quell the sense of betrayal tightening her chest, but each hurried step reminded her that this man, her protector, her love, had hidden an unfathomable truth. They reached an isolated room tucked within a narrow passage, its metal door rusted and half hidden behind crates and debris. Eli pulled Laura inside, locking the door behind them, plunging them into tense silence. Only their labored breaths disturbed the oppressive quiet. Laura pulled her hand away abruptly, stepping back, eyes blazing with hurt. You knew all along, Eli. You brought me here deliberately. For what? To sacrifice me. He shook his head vehemently, agony clear in his expression. It was their plan, not mine. They controlled everything, including me. But meeting you, it changed everything. I never expected to fall in love, Laura. Never. Yet here we are, she shot back, voice brittle with bitterness. In a nightmare you orchestrated. No, Eli pleaded softly, eyes glistening with unshed tears. I've been fighting them my entire life. Bringing you here was supposed to end their control over me. They promised me answers, freedom, but I could never imagine harming you." Laura watched him, torn between empathy and the aching wound of deception. Eli reached out slowly, tentative, pain etched deeply into his features. "Laura, you're the only thing real in my life," he whispered urgently. "I would die before letting them hurt you." The raw sincerity in his voice fractured her anger. She felt her defenses crumble, recognizing his agony mirrored her own. Yet forgiveness remained difficult, tangled within the betrayal that still burned sharply. Before she could respond, voices erupted beyond the locked door, sharp, commanding, dangerous. A heavy fist pounded the metal surface, sending vibrations through their bones. "We know you're inside, Eli," a cold voice called through the steel barrier. "Give her up, and you'll have your answers." Eli glanced desperately at Laura, determination hardening his features. "Never," he muttered fiercely, jaw clenched tight with resolve. Laura drew in a steadying breath, meeting his gaze with renewed strength. "Then we fight together," she said, the edge of betrayal softening slightly as trust rekindled within her words. "No more secrets." Eli nodded, understanding and relief evident in his eyes. "No more secrets." The pounding intensified, echoing in terrifying rhythm. Side by side, Eli and Laura stood resolute, prepared to face whatever darkness lay beyond, united now by the painful truth and the fragile, defiant bond they chose to rebuild. The door buckled suddenly under the weight of a heavy impact, metal creaking dangerously. Eli grabbed Laura's arm, pulling her toward a narrow ventilation shaft hidden behind stacked crates in the room's corner. "In here, quickly," he whispered urgently, sliding the grate aside. Laura hesitated briefly, anxiety clawing at her chest, before crawling inside. Eli followed immediately, securing the grate behind them just as the door burst open with a violent crash. The shaft was cramped, dark, and filled with stale air, each breath tasting of rust and mildew. Crawling forward, guided only by faint reflections from their phone screens, they moved silently through the claustrophobic passage. Sounds of frustrated shouts echoed distantly behind them, gradually fading as they moved deeper into the labyrinth. Eventually, the narrow path opened into a larger chamber, dimly illuminated by a single, flickering bulb overhead. The room was in chaos, scattered equipment, overturned lab tables, shattered glass glittering like sinister diamonds across the floor. "What happened here?" Laura whispered, stepping carefully around debris. "Abandoned experiments," Eli replied grimly, eyes scanning the wreckage with bitter recognition. "Failures left to rot." Laura's stomach churned at his words, understanding the magnitude of cruelty that once took place in these tunnels. She picked up a discarded notebook, pages brittle and stained. Scribbled notes depicted grotesque diagrams and fragmented entries detailing monstrous manipulations of human DNA. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked softly, not looking at Eli. He hesitated, voice tight with guilt. "I was afraid. Afraid you'd see me as one of them, as something less than human." Laura turned to face him, eyes softening despite lingering tension. "You're not responsible for their sins, Eli. You didn't choose this." His gaze met hers, gratitude and regret mingling painfully in his eyes. "Maybe not, but I should have fought harder, should have told you the truth before bringing you into danger." Their quiet conversation was shattered by a sudden, chilling sound. An alarm blared violently through hidden speakers, accompanied by red emergency lights pulsing ominously along the tunnel walls. Fear surged through them simultaneously. "They're sealing the tunnels," Eli said sharply, urgency returning. "We need to find a way out now." Laura scanned the room desperately, spotting another door partially obscured by debris. Eli rushed to clear a path, muscles straining with frantic energy. Together, they forced the heavy door open, revealing a long, descending corridor bathed in eerie, crimson light. Hand in hand, they plunged deeper into the facility, hearts hammering, each step an act of rebellion against the darkness pursuing them. The air grew colder, the atmosphere heavier, whispering cruel secrets of the horrors committed beneath their feet. But Laura felt something shift within her, a newfound determination, forged in the darkness. She would not let fear or betrayal consume her. They would survive this together, escaping the shadows that threatened to swallow them whole. The corridor twisted deeper underground, illuminated sporadically by flickering red lights that painted their surroundings in stark, unsettling hues. Laura's fingers gripped Eli's hand tightly, each step amplifying the sense of claustrophobic dread pressing in from all sides. The air felt colder now, heavy with moisture and a scent of mildew mixed unsettlingly with something metallic and sharp. Suddenly, from the darkness ahead came the muted sound of footsteps, soft, cautious, yet unmistakably human. Eli stiffened instinctively, stepping protectively in front of Laura. His breath was shallow, eyes narrowed in wary anticipation. "Who's there?" he called firmly into the shadows. A tense silence followed before a figure slowly stepped into the dim red glow. Tall, lean, his eyes sharp but weary. He raised his hands carefully, signaling peace. "We're friends," he said quietly. "Escaped just like you." Laura felt a cautious surge of hope. Behind him emerged two more figures, a woman with striking pale eyes and dark hair, and another younger man whose wary gaze darted anxiously around the tunnel. "I'm Marcus," the tall stranger continued, voice steady yet warm with calm authority. He gestured toward the woman beside him. "This is Emma, and the kid is Luke." Eli hesitated, tension still palpable in his stance. "How did you find us?" Marcus glanced briefly at Emma, whose eyes seemed to shimmer strangely in the dim light. "Emma sensed you. The experiments," his voice hardened briefly, "left some of us with unexpected gifts." Emma stepped forward slowly, her voice gentle but firm. "You're not alone anymore. We've all been betrayed, used, broken, but we're survivors. Like you." Laura stepped out from behind Eli, drawn by the sincerity and strength radiating from the newcomers. "Can you help us get out?" Marcus nodded decisively. "We've been mapping these tunnels. There's a hidden maintenance route that leads toward the surface, but it's risky." "Everything here is risky," Eli muttered grimly. He met Marcus's gaze, measuring trust and caution. "But staying here isn't an option." Marcus nodded knowingly. "Then we stick together. Strength in numbers." Together, the group moved swiftly through the shadowed passages, navigating corridors that grew narrower, walls slick with condensation. Emma occasionally paused, head tilted slightly as if listening to something unseen, guiding them forward with eerie precision. Laura found herself walking beside Emma, curiosity overcoming her fear. "Can you really sense things down here?" Emma smiled faintly, sadness edging her voice. "Sometimes too clearly. Pain leaves echoes, Laura, and this place is filled with screams no one else can hear." Laura shivered involuntarily, suddenly grateful for Eli's reassuring presence beside her, solid and protective despite the shadows of his past. Yet she felt stronger now, fortified by this newfound alliance. They were no longer alone in the dark. Ahead, Marcus paused, signaling silence. A distant sound reverberated, a mechanical hum, growing steadily louder. "We're close," Marcus murmured tensely, eyes sharp. "Stay alert. They'll be guarding the exit." Laura exchanged a resolute glance with Eli. Whatever awaited, they faced it together, ready to reclaim their freedom from the depths of darkness. In the stark, clinical control room far above the labyrinth, Dr. Richard Grayson stood silently before an array of glowing monitors, their harsh blue light sharpening the severe lines of his face. His eyes, piercing and devoid of warmth, moved methodically across surveillance feeds, each displaying grainy images of empty corridors and abandoned laboratories. "They've joined the others," reported a voice from behind him, a young technician anxiously awaiting reaction. Grayson's silence lingered, amplifying the tension within the sterile space. Finally, he spoke, voice measured and chillingly composed. Eli was designed for precisely this kind of resilience. We anticipated resistance, but not betrayal. He's exceeded even my expectations. Should we proceed with containment protocols? The technician asked cautiously. Grayson's expression darkened subtly, a faint twist of irritation tugging at his mouth. "Not yet. Eli is unique, a masterpiece. I want him back intact. Use the others to pressure him, especially the girl. She's his weakness." "Yes, sir," the technician replied nervously, quickly returning to his console. Alone again, Grayson stepped closer to the monitors, focusing intently on Eli's image frozen mid-stride beside Laura. A cold, clinical fascination stirred in his eyes as he studied the woman, her resolve visible even through the grainy footage. Laura was an unplanned variable, yet she intrigued him, representing a catalyst he hadn't fully anticipated. "Remarkable," Grayson murmured softly, a thin smile forming briefly. Even artificial life clings so desperately to emotion, believing it grants them purpose. A sudden alarm flashed across the screens, red warnings cascading down several monitors simultaneously. Grayson's gaze sharpened, watching intently as the escaped subjects cautiously navigated toward the heavily guarded upper exits. The faintest hint of admiration flickered in his expression before swiftly dissolving into calculated focus. He activated a communications link, voice cold and authoritative. "Security teams, initiate containment maneuvers. Push them toward the main junction, no lethal force. Remember, Eli remains priority." "Yes, Dr. Grayson," came an immediate reply, swift footsteps echoing in distant corridors. Leaning back slightly, Grayson interlaced his fingers thoughtfully, mind racing through endless strategic scenarios. Eli had always been more than just an experiment. He was the culmination of decades of meticulous research, the perfect embodiment of genetic refinement. Losing him would mean losing decades of work. That, Grayson resolved coldly, was unacceptable. Yet beneath the cold logic, he felt a flicker of anticipation, an almost primal thrill at the intellectual challenge Eli presented. No mere creation had ever matched him move for move, and the novelty of this confrontation invigorated him, sharpening his focus. Turning away from the screens, he drew a deep breath, preparing himself mentally for the impending confrontation. He had engineered Eli's strength, but he had also crafted his weaknesses, and now he would exploit them, stripping away every layer of humanity Eli had so desperately sought to build. Grayson smiled once more, calculating and assured. Eli believed himself capable of rebellion, but ultimately, he would learn that freedom, like everything else, was merely an illusion carefully engineered by the man who had shaped him from birth. Hidden within a shadowed alcove beneath flickering emergency lights, Eli pressed his back against the cold concrete, struggling to steady his racing heartbeat. Marcus had positioned the others further along the tunnel to keep watch, granting Eli and Laura a moment of strained privacy amidst the chaos. Laura watched Eli intently, seeing clearly the torment he fought to conceal beneath a veneer of strength. The betrayal still lingered, An unhealed wound, yet understanding softened her eyes. She stepped forward cautiously, bridging the distance he'd instinctively created. "Eli," she began softly, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of machinery and muted conversations of their allies. "You have to forgive yourself first." His eyes flashed upward, pain raw and unguarded. "I've endangered you. I put everyone at risk because of who I am." Laura shook her head gently, stepping closer. "They created you, Eli. They manipulated your life. But your choices, right now, those belong only to you." Eli's breath caught, tension trembling visibly through his frame. "But how can you trust me after all this? After knowing what I've hidden?" Laura reached out tentatively, her fingertips grazing his hand, a gentle anchor in the darkness. "Because beneath it all, the man I love is still there, fighting against everything they've done to him." Her words pierced the armor of guilt he'd been wearing, allowing hope to stir tentatively within him. For the first time since childhood, Eli felt truly seen, not as an experiment or a weapon, but as a man worthy of love and redemption. Yet shadows of doubt lingered stubbornly. What if this was their plan all along? What if my rebellion is just another controlled reaction? Laura met his gaze firmly, defiant of his fears. "Then we rewrite the ending, Eli. Together. They underestimated us once. They won't do it again." A sudden commotion erupted down the corridor. Urgent voices, hurried footsteps. Marcus appeared swiftly at the alcove's entrance, eyes alert. "They've found us," Marcus warned sharply. "We need to move, now." Eli straightened, determination hardening his expression as he grasped Laura's hand tightly. The internal struggle still echoed deep within him, but now it was tempered by resolve, fortified by Laura's unwavering trust. "We'll face whatever comes next," Eli said resolutely, stepping forward with renewed purpose. "No more hiding from who I am or what they've done." Laura smiled softly, pride and strength lighting her features. "No more hiding," she echoed firmly. Together they rejoined Marcus and the others, ready to continue their journey through the depths. Eli could feel the bonds between them tightening, forged stronger through shared pain and defiance. He no longer fought alone, no longer bore the burden of his origins in silence. As they moved forward into the uncertain darkness, Eli realized that freedom wasn't merely escape. It was the courage to confront his past openly, with those who stood faithfully beside him. The tunnel widened into a cavernous room filled with shelves stacked high with boxes and faded documents. The air felt stagnant, heavy with the dust of forgotten secrets. Eli moved forward, scanning hastily labeled containers, urgency sharpening every movement. Marcus quickly signaled the group to fan out, each searching frantically through piles of scattered papers and abandoned files. Laura joined Eli, heart pounding, fingers trembling as she rifled through brittle pages covered in handwritten notes and clinical observations. Her pulse quickened as the magnitude of the atrocities committed here unfolded before her eyes, each detail colder than the last. "I think I found something," Marcus called, his voice tense and sharp. Eli rushed to his side, eyes narrowing as Marcus held out a thick folder, its edges frayed with age. The folder bore Grayson's name boldly across the top. Eli flipped it open, the pages filled with meticulous, almost obsessive notes detailing experiments on subjects identified only by numbers. Laura gasped softly, hand pressed to her mouth in horror as she read over Eli's shoulder. These experiments were performed on his own family, Marcus whispered grimly, pointing to a faded photograph tucked between the pages. In the picture stood a younger Grayson beside a woman and two small children, their faces frozen in forced smiles, eyes haunted even then. Eli's stomach churned, anger mingling with disgust. His obsession consumed everything, even his own humanity. Laura turned pale, her voice barely audible. How could anyone do this? Because he saw people as tools, Eli responded bitterly. Even those he claimed to love were just another resource to exploit. Suddenly, Emma stiffened, her eyes widening with alarm. They're coming. I can feel them closing in, she whispered urgently, her voice edged with fear. Gather everything you can carry, Marcus commanded sharply. We need proof, something undeniable. The group scrambled to collect vital documents, each page feeling heavier with the weight of the horrific truths they carried. Eli carefully secured Grayson's folder, understanding its critical importance. It wasn't just evidence, it was a weapon against the man who'd shaped his existence. Footsteps echoed loudly down the corridor, growing rapidly closer. The tension surged through Eli's veins, sharpening his senses as adrenaline erased all doubts. He reached for Laura's hand, grasping it tightly, feeling her pulse match the rhythm of his own. No turning back now, Marcus said firmly, eyes ablaze with determination. The world needs to see these secrets. Laura nodded resolutely, courage shining brightly through her fear. Then let's show them the truth. Together, the group raced toward a distant exit, hearts united by a shared mission to expose the darkness that had bound them for so long. Eli felt a fierce clarity replace his inner turmoil. This was his purpose now, to bring the twisted legacy of his creator crashing down. Behind them, the voices of their pursuers grew louder, relentless, and dangerously close. But ahead lay the possibility of freedom, hard-won and closer than ever before. The path upward twisted sharply, narrowing into a steep incline illuminated only by sporadic emergency lights that pulsed dimly overhead. Each step felt heavier, the documents they carried burdening not just their arms but their consciences. Suddenly, without warning, powerful beams of light erupted from above, blinding and disorienting the group. "Stop where you are," commanded a voice, sharp and authoritative, echoing harshly through the tunnel. Shadows detached from the darkness, revealing armed guards encircling them, their weapons trained steadily on Eli and the others. Marcus stepped protectively forward, attempting to shield the group. "We're not going back." A guard moved swiftly, striking Marcus hard and forcing him to the ground. Eli surged instinctively forward, rage flaring, but stopped abruptly as a familiar voice sliced coldly through the chaos. "Enough, Eli." Grayson emerged smoothly from behind the guards, his expression calm, eyes calculating. He regarded the captives with mild curiosity, but his gaze lingered intently on Eli, as if appraising a particularly valuable artifact. "Let them go," Eli demanded fiercely. "It's me you want." Grayson smiled thinly, unmoved. Always so noble, yet predictable. Laura edged closer to Eli, her defiance fierce despite trembling visibly. Grayson noticed, a faint smirk playing at his lips. "Laura," Grayson spoke softly, deliberately, his voice like poison honey. "Did Eli tell you the full truth about why you're here?" She stiffened, heart racing. "Don't listen to him," Eli warned sharply, desperation in his eyes. "Oh, but she deserves honesty, doesn't she?" Grayson continued calmly, savoring each cruel word. "You were always intended for the next stage of the project, Laura. Eli knew. His freedom depended on your sacrifice." Laura recoiled as if physically struck, confusion and betrayal flashing across her face. She turned to Eli, eyes wide, pleading silently for denial. "I never would have let them hurt you," Eli whispered urgently, pain etched deeply in every word. "It was their plan, never mine." Grayson watched their interaction closely, satisfaction flickering briefly in his eyes. Yet here we are, Eli, precisely as intended. Eli lunged forward with sudden fury, only to be swiftly subdued by guards who forced him roughly to the ground. His struggles were fierce but futile, driven by desperation to reach Laura. Grayson leaned down, whispering harshly into Eli's ear, voice filled with cold menace. "You belong to me, Eli. Fighting it only brings more pain." Eli's eyes burned with defiance. "You can't control me anymore." Grayson straightened slowly, his expression darkening. "We shall see." Laura watched helplessly as Eli was dragged away, her heart fracturing painfully. Marcus and Emma exchanged tense, desperate glances, silently planning their next move. Grayson approached Laura, his demeanor gentle yet terrifyingly cold. "Come willingly, Laura," he whispered softly, eyes gleaming with sinister promise. "Or others will pay the price." She stood frozen, understanding her impossible choice, surrender or watch those she cared for suffer. Defeat filled her expression briefly, replaced swiftly by a fragile but unbroken resolve. Her decision was clear, though agonizing. "I'll come," she whispered bitterly, surrendering momentarily to darkness to protect the light of hope she knew still flickered stubbornly in Eli's eyes. The cold cell's dim lighting cast ghostly shadows across Eli's exhausted features. His wrists ached from restraints, raw and bruised from his futile struggles. Across the narrow corridor, Laura sat motionless behind reinforced glass, her expression unreadable beneath a mask of forced calm. Despite their separation, the fragile bond between them felt stronger, tempered by adversity rather than broken by betrayal. Suddenly, distant explosions echoed faintly through the walls, their vibrations rumbling ominously through the structure. Eli jolted upright, instantly alert. Guards rushed past, shouting frantically, confusion thick in their voices. A sharp crackle filled the intercom, followed by Marcus's determined voice cutting through the chaos. "Hold tight. We're coming for you." Hope surged through Eli's chest, renewing his determination. Laura's eyes met his across the divide, understanding flaring brightly between them. They were not forgotten. Seconds later, alarms erupted in piercing cries, flashing red lights casting wild patterns across the stark walls. Explosions intensified, shaking the facility violently. Eli strained fiercely against his restraints, desperation driving him, adrenaline dulling the pain. Outside his cell, figures emerged swiftly through the smoke-filled corridor, Marcus and Emma leading, their faces soot-streaked but resolute. Marcus swiftly disabled the electronic locks, the cell doors sliding open with a metallic hiss. Emma rushed to Laura, gently freeing her from restraints, while Marcus quickly approached Eli, cutting him loose. "Thought we'd leave you behind," Marcus joked grimly, gripping Eli's shoulder firmly. "We still need you." Eli nodded gratefully, flexing numb fingers, determination hardening his features. "Let's finish this." Together, the group moved swiftly through corridors thick with smoke and chaos. Guards appeared sporadically, disoriented and overwhelmed, easily bypassed or subdued. The facility was descending rapidly into panic, each explosion further destabilizing its control. Laura stayed close to Eli, her hand tightly clasped in his, an unspoken promise never to be separated again. Her fear transformed gradually into fierce defiance, matching the resolve of those around her. Reaching a central junction, they found the exit heavily barricaded, guards frantically assembling a desperate defense. Marcus signaled the group silently, determination hardening his eyes. "We need a distraction," Marcus said urgently. Emma stepped forward immediately, eyes blazing with quiet courage. "I'll handle it," she replied firmly. Before objections could be voiced, Emma strode forward, her presence oddly calm amidst the chaos. Her strange abilities erupted powerfully, lights flickering wildly, sparks cascading violently from ruptured wiring. Guards scattered in panic, disoriented by the unnatural display. Marcus swiftly led the others forward, crashing through the weakened barricades. Eli hesitated briefly, looking back at Emma, whose expression remained steady, serene amidst destruction. "Go," she commanded forcefully, eyes meeting Eli's briefly with unyielding resolve. Reluctantly, Eli turned, racing onward alongside Laura and Marcus, hearts pounding fiercely, knowing freedom was finally within reach. Bursting through the final door, they emerged breathless into open air, stars glittering serenely above, a stark, surreal contrast to the chaos behind. Yet even in triumph, Eli felt the weight of sacrifice, understanding clearly now the cost of freedom. He tightened his grip on Laura's hand, silently promising to honor those sacrifices by ensuring the darkness they'd escaped would never claim them again. Moonlight bathed the dense forest in ghostly shades of silver as the group raced forward, stumbling through thick underbrush, hearts pounding with urgency. Eli led, his senses heightened, acutely aware that freedom remained fragile and precarious. Laura clung tightly to his hand, matching each step with fierce determination. After what felt like endless hours, they finally broke through the forest into a small, secluded settlement nestled quietly among tall pines. Cozy cabins lined the clearing, their soft lights spilling warmth into the cold night air. Marcus slowed, signaling caution. "Will they help us?" Laura whispered uncertainly, glancing warily toward the nearest cabin, windows glowing invitingly. "They must," Marcus replied firmly, exhaustion etched deeply into his features. "We have no other choice." Approaching cautiously, Marcus knocked on the nearest door, its wooden surface weathered by time. After a tense pause, it opened slowly, revealing an older man whose eyes narrowed suspiciously at the disheveled group before him. "What's going on?" the man demanded gruffly, scanning them warily. "We need help," Marcus pleaded, urgency thickening his voice. "Please." After brief hesitation, the man opened the door wider, gesturing them hastily inside. Moments later, the small cabin filled with murmurs as other villagers gathered, their expressions a mix of skepticism and concern. Eli stood silently, tension coiling tightly within him, sensing both hope and doubt emanating from their reluctant rescuers. Marcus quickly explained their plight, presenting scattered evidence from the retrieved documents, each revelation deepening the villagers' shock and outrage. One woman stepped forward, examining the papers closely, eyes narrowing sharply. This is real?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Every word," Eli confirmed quietly, stepping forward with an unwavering gaze. "We barely escaped. More will suffer if the world doesn't know." The woman's expression hardened resolutely. "Then we help you." Her determination spread quickly among the villagers, igniting fierce murmurs of agreement. Relief surged visibly through Eli and Laura, momentarily easing the tension etched deeply in their faces. Yet relief was fleeting. Suddenly, distant headlights pierced the darkness outside, cutting harshly through windows and flooding the cabin with pale, threatening light. "They've found us," Eli whispered urgently, his voice heavy with dread. Marcus immediately moved toward the window, expression tense, jaw clenched tightly. "They won't take us quietly. Not again." Eli nodded, feeling Laura grip his hand tighter, her courage shining brightly despite palpable fear. The villagers swiftly mobilized, barricading doors and readying themselves against inevitable confrontation. Within moments, the settlement buzzed with quiet, fierce determination, a community united by newfound purpose against encroaching darkness. Eli felt profoundly moved, strengthened by the solidarity surrounding him. He glanced at Laura, determination solidifying in his eyes. "We fight," he said firmly, voice steady despite exhaustion. Laura met his gaze unwaveringly, her voice clear and strong. Together, as the distant vehicles approached steadily, Eli understood clearly that tonight, they weren't merely survivors. They had become warriors, ready to defend their freedom at all costs. Headlights flooded the village square, casting stark, elongated shadows across tense faces gathered defiantly beneath the silver glow of the moon. Doors slammed as armed men emerged from vehicles, forming a disciplined line behind Dr. Grayson, who strode forward confidently, expression calmly detached, eyes locked intently on Eli. Eli stepped forward slowly, squaring his shoulders, heart thundering fiercely against his chest. Marcus, Laura, and the villagers stood firm at his side, united by determination and raw courage. Grayson halted just meters away, a thin smile playing coldly at his lips. "You surprise me, Eli," Grayson began evenly, voice deceptively gentle yet edged with menace. "Turning these innocent people into shields? I expected better from you." Eli shook his head resolutely. "You made me into a weapon, but I'm choosing who to protect. Not you, not your twisted experiments." Grayson's expression hardened subtly, eyes narrowing. "Everything you have, everything you are, I gave you. Do you really think these strangers will protect you once they know the truth?" Laura stepped forward sharply, her voice strong and unwavering. "We know exactly who he is. And unlike you, we see him as human." Grayson glanced briefly at Laura, mild amusement coloring his voice. "Yet Eli brought you here, Laura, fully aware of what awaited. He betrayed you once. He will again." Eli's fists clenched tightly, fighting down his rage. "You're wrong," he said, voice dangerously calm. "You may have created me, but you don't control my choices. Not anymore." Grayson's composure flickered briefly, genuine anger flaring behind his carefully maintained facade. He turned deliberately, addressing the villagers now, voice rising clearly, confidently. "These people are dangerous, products of unstable experimentation. Surrender them, and no harm will come to your community." Silence stretched tautly across the square, villagers exchanging tense glances. Eli's heart sank briefly until the woman who had first believed them stepped forward defiantly. "No," she said firmly, eyes blazing with fierce defiance. "We've seen your secrets. We choose to stand with them." Grayson's smile vanished entirely, replaced by cold fury. "Then you've sealed your fate." He signaled sharply, guards advancing menacingly forward. Villagers moved swiftly, creating a protective barrier around Eli and his companions. Chaos erupted instantly, shouts, clashes, and cries of defiance filling the air as villagers bravely fought against trained guards. Amidst the chaos, Eli surged toward Grayson, desperation and anger fueling each step. They collided violently, grappling fiercely, hatred crackling dangerously between them. "You can't escape what you are," Grayson hissed furiously, eyes blazing with raw contempt. Eli pushed back forcefully, voice resolute, defiant. "I already have." In a sudden burst of strength born from deep within, Eli forced Grayson to the ground, pinning him firmly beneath his grasp. Grayson's eyes widened briefly in shock, realizing at last the powerlessness of control he once wielded. Eli leaned close, voice low, steady with finality. Your experiment failed. Humanity always finds its way back. As villagers subdued the remaining guards, Eli stood slowly. Victory both physical and deeply personal. Grayson, restrained and defeated, glared bitterly upward, his empire of manipulation crumbling irrevocably. Eli turned toward Laura, Marcus, and the villagers, feeling profound gratitude surge through him. Tonight, united, they had reclaimed their freedom and his very humanity. The echoes of conflict faded into a tense stillness, broken only by the harsh breathing of villagers and the restrained groans of Grayson's subdued guards. Smoke curled softly into the night sky from small fires scattered around the square, a poignant symbol of the fierce resistance they had mounted. Villagers moved quietly, aiding wounded friends and restraining captured enemies. Eli stood in the midst of it all, chest heaving, adrenaline still surging through him. Laura stepped quietly beside him, intertwining her fingers gently with his. Her touch calmed the chaos raging inside him, anchoring him to the newfound reality of their victory. Marcus approached, exhausted but resolute, his gaze hardening as he glanced at Grayson, now kneeling silently, bound tightly. "What happens now?" "We expose him," Eli answered firmly, voice carrying clearly across the square. "We show the world everything he's done." Grayson's head lifted slowly, a bitter sneer twisting his lips. "You think this ends with me, Eli? There are others, powerful people who will bury this deeper than any tunnel." Eli met his gaze steadily, defiance strengthening his resolve. "Then we'll bring them down too. Every one of you." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, solidarity resonating powerfully. Grayson's confidence flickered briefly, overshadowed by unease as he sensed the fragile balance of power shifting irrevocably. From the villagers, one young man stepped forward cautiously, camera phone in hand. "I recorded everything," he announced nervously but proudly. "People will see the truth." Eli felt a rush of relief, understanding instantly the significance of what the young man had captured. Laura squeezed his hand gently, hope shining brightly in her eyes. Grayson's shoulders slumped, realizing finally the extent of his defeat. Yet victory remained fragile. In the distance, the faint sound of approaching vehicles broke through the silence, igniting fresh tension within the gathered crowd. Marcus's expression tightened sharply, preparing instinctively for renewed conflict. But as the headlights appeared, illuminating the settlement, it became clear these vehicles bore a different presence. Authorities summoned by villagers alerted earlier by the disturbance. Relief swept visibly through the crowd, exhaustion replaced by cautious optimism. Officers approached swiftly, carefully taking Grayson and his guards into custody, securing evidence provided by the villagers. Eli and Laura watched in silent relief as justice began to unfold, finally tangible after endless suffering. As dawn slowly crept over the horizon, villagers gathered closely, exchanging quiet, proud glances, bonds forged stronger than ever by their shared courage. Marcus clapped Eli firmly on the shoulder, gratitude and respect shining warmly in his eyes. "You changed everything tonight, Eli," Marcus said sincerely, voice filled with quiet admiration. Eli glanced at Laura, heart swelling with deep appreciation. "No," he responded softly, gazing out at the villagers around them. "We all did." Together they watched as the first rays of dawn broke through the lingering darkness, signaling not merely the end of a nightmare, but the beginning of true freedom, an era built upon courage, unity, and the unyielding strength of truth. The days that followed moved like a slow, unraveling storm. Media crews arrived, drawn by viral footage and the sudden exposure of a conspiracy long buried beneath the surface. Helicopters hovered above the forest, satellite trucks lined the village's borders, and reporters camped in makeshift tents, chasing pieces of the story like scavengers drawn to flame. Eli stood quietly at the edge of it all, watching chaos take on a new form, one dressed in microphones and blinking lights. Beside him, Laura remained a steady presence, anchoring him with her touch, her calm, and the quiet strength in her gaze. The evidence the villagers had protected was irrefutable. Video recordings, lab documents, Grayson's own twisted research logs. Public outcry followed swiftly. Protests, investigations, and hearings erupted across the country. Every truth Eli and his allies had uncovered now surged into daylight, and people could no longer look away. Grayson stood trial under intense scrutiny, his usual composure stripped away beneath the glares of a furious world. The courtroom pulsed with tension, filled with victims, journalists, and government officials. Laura testified first, her voice steady but charged with emotion, detailing what they had endured, what she had discovered, and what she had nearly become. Eli followed, stepping into the light with a quiet kind of power. He looked into the faces of those who once would have labeled him an abomination and spoke plainly, without self-pity. "I didn't ask to be created," he said, "but I choose who I become." His words rippled through the courtroom like thunder muffled under glass. People listened, truly listened, and something shifted. When the verdict came, it was unanimous. Grayson was found guilty on all counts: unethical experimentation, abuse, unlawful imprisonment. His sentence was severe, his legacy destroyed. As he was led away, he no longer met Eli's gaze. His empire, built on control, had been undone by the very creation he once thought he owned. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in applause, not for vengeance, but for truth. Back in the village, the forest had begun to bloom again. The lab tunnels were sealed and reclaimed by the roots of the earth. What was hidden was no longer feared, it was finished. Marcus and Emma chose to remain nearby, helping others find safety, offering survivors a home. The village became a symbol, not of tragedy, but of resistance, of rebirth. One quiet evening, Eli and Laura sat by the lake where it all began. The air was still, the sky wide and open. "We made it," Laura whispered, her head resting on his shoulder. Eli didn't speak. He only nodded, watching the reflection of stars dance across the water. Mist drifted lazily across the surface of the lake as morning light filtered through the tall pines, casting golden ribbons over the water. The cabin stood just as it had weeks ago, weathered, peaceful, remote, but the silence it held now was no longer ominous. It was healing. Eli stood on the porch, barefoot, watching a family of deer pass silently through the trees. His chest rose and fell with steady breath, the ache of old fear finally giving way to a deeper kind of stillness. Behind him, the door creaked open gently. Laura stepped out, wrapped in a thick wool sweater, a cup of coffee cradled between her hands. She leaned against the railing beside him, her shoulder brushing his. Neither spoke for a moment. The quiet was sacred. "Do you think they'll ever come back?" she asked softly, eyes fixed on the horizon. Eli shook his head, a faint smile curving his lips. "No, their power is broken. And if anyone tries again, the world's watching now." Laura nodded, comforted not just by the words, but by the strength in his voice. The world had changed, and so had they. After breakfast, they walked down to the lake's edge, their steps slow, unhurried. The same spot where she'd once felt something stir beneath the ground now seemed untouched, as if the earth itself had buried the past with care. Eli reached into his jacket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. "I've been holding on to this," he said quietly, unwrapping the item. A delicate silver ring, simple, elegant. Laura blinked, caught off guard, heart skipping once. "I didn't come from the world the way others do," Eli said. "But you gave me something real. You made me human. And free." He knelt slowly, not with grand gestures or scripted lines, just quiet sincerity and eyes full of hope. "Will you stay with me? Whatever comes next. I want to face it with you." Laura's eyes shimmered, tears balanced carefully on the edge of joy. "Of course I will," she whispered, pulling him to his feet and into a kiss that tasted of salt, sunlight, and everything they'd survived. They stayed by the lake until the sun was high, hand in hand, letting the silence speak for them. Above them, birds soared freely through the blue, and beneath their feet, the ground no longer whispered secrets. It simply held them steady. A new day had begun. Some scars never fade, nor should they. They remind us where we've been, and more importantly, who we chose to become. Eli no longer questioned what made him real. It wasn't the blood in his veins or the code buried in his cells. It was the choices he made in the darkest moments. The choice to fight, to protect, to love. What had been built in secret, with cruelty and control, was undone by something no experiment could replicate: humanity. The world above would move on, as it always does. But beneath it, in a place once ruled by shadows, light had taken root. And sometimes that's all it takes. One spark to prove the system wrong.